This video is going to be a follow-up on the Aimpoint ACRO. Carl has previously reviewed the Aimpoint ACRO on the channel, but he didn't ever get the chance to do any really long-term testing with it. I purchased this Aimpoint ACRO back in January of 2020, and I used it all the way up through August of 2020 at a number of matches. Before I get started, I'll do a brief overview of the gun I have it mounted to. This is a KE19 Charlie slide. The rail the Aimpoint ACRO attaches to is milled into the slide. There's a dovetail behind it. I originally had these XS sights mounted to the slide. They're the F8 sights, but the front sight kept coming loose, and that's kind of a problem with a lot of taller Glock sights, is that they will work themselves loose over time, even with red Loctite, because of the added mass and the fact they're held in by just a tiny hex head screw. So in the end, I end up taking those off the gun. But I'm using a Silencer Co. barrel with the short thread 2-port carry comp from KE Arms, using a KE Arms steel guide rod with a ISMI flat wire spring. I found this gun to run best with a 15-pound spring. Sometimes, depending on the loads and the fit of the parts in the gun, you may have to go up or down in the spring weight, but that's one of the reasons why you want to use an uncaptured guide rod and have a few different springs to try out. So in this one, I settled with a 15-pounder. The framework has been done by Wheatley II. Actually lasered my Gila Monster pattern of scales into the grip itself. It's featuring the flat KE Arms carry trigger and the KE Arms carry magwell. This is a Gen 3 frame that has had all this work done to it. And of course, I have the Surefire X300 mounted. So I've been using dots on handguns since 2010. I first used an RMR Type 1 at the Ironman 3-gun match back then. And the first match I used it at, I had problems with the lens filling up with sand between stages, being in an open holster. So one of the reasons I was looking forward to the Aimpoint ACRO is that it is sealed to the elements. It has a front and rear lens, so it is less susceptible to dirt, debris, and theoretically moisture from getting inside of it. So I started using this gun back in January of 2020, and I'm going to take you through some of the matches I used it at, and then through the final result I had at the end of that time period. Prior to competing using the ACRO, I zeroed it at 20 yards in my ransom rest. No matter what your level of skill is, there's always a learning curve when transitioning to new equipment. One of the things I had to get used to using the ACRO was that it sat lower in the slide, and consequently changed my presentation to see the dot versus using the Delta Point Pro that I'd been competing with the previous 2 years. Some of this acclimatization can be done at home with dry fire, presentations, and transitioning between targets, but there's no substitute for acquiring the sight through the recoil cycle as it occurs during live fire. This stage gave the shooter 60 seconds to neutralize all these various moving targets and falling steel. This was a good early test for me with the ACRO, getting used to tracking the dot through recoil and tracking moving targets looking through it. Obviously, the last array is stationary, but my hit ratio improves as I moved through this course, gaining data for every shot fired, learning where my dot was going to track to, and knowing when to send the shot. Here I am in Chino Valley in February of 2020 at Desert Brutality, and the temperatures at this time of the day were sub-freezing, around 29 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't have any problem using the ACRO in this condition. The optic remained clear. I did have some trouble with my fingers freezing, but I was one of 14 shooters out of 201 that was able to complete the spinner on this stage. Here's a good example of using the ACRO to engage these mini auto poppers at 15 yards at an awkward angle, canting the pistol to be able to look through the sight through the vision port of the shield. Moving into the summer, it's 115 degrees in Mesa, Arizona. No trouble using the ACRO in this higher heat environment, including leaving it stored in my vehicle that gets up to 165 degrees in the sun. Several months into using the ACRO, I'm feeling very comfortable with it. I'm used to the presentation, tracking moving targets, and I know exactly how fast I can run the gun and make every shot count. At this point, I've removed the iron sights because of that problem with the front sight staying in place that I mentioned, but I don't have any trouble finding the dot on the draw or keeping track of the orientation of the pistol through movement. Being able to shoot with both eyes open allows me to get my timing down on hitting this spinner the faster it's going. The stage begins engaging 4 falling steel and a Texas Star. After these targets are neutralized, the shooter must remove their magazine with only 1 round left in the chamber and engage the target at the back. I brace on the wall to make sure my shot counts. If you miss that target, you could not make it up. You had to move on to this next area regardless. Once in the box over here, the shooter must reload and engage this target with 2 hits at 50 yards. And here's where things start to go wrong for the Acro. As I'm making ready for this stage, I notice a bright white-blue dot in the center of the lens with lines emanating from it and overall distortion. It's August of 2020 in Phoenix, and it's monsoon season. It's very high humidity in the morning and high temperature. With that bright white-blue dot and the distortion of the lens, my hit ratio on these larger targets goes to hell. All the previous stages should be evidence of my shooting ability with this pistol, so it's pretty clear that something's gone wrong inside the optic. This is later in the day, and the humidity is burned off, and the blue-white dot and distortion inside the lens has disappeared. After the first stage, I had a couple other shooters look through the Acro, and they confirmed that they saw exactly the same thing that I did. So at this point, my conclusion is that there was humidity inside the lens. I'm back to hitting as I should on all these smaller targets, and rotating the spinner at the end here is absolutely no challenge at all. After the match was over, I contacted Aimpoint customer service and sent the Acro back to them for repair. I got my Aimpoint Acro back from Aimpoint. It took about 6 weeks to turn around. They said they could not find the leak, but they added more glue to the brightness adjustment switch area. So what I'm going to do is I've heated up some water inside a little cup inside this Tupperware, and I'm going to stick it inside this environment for a little bit, probably about a half hour, and let's see if it leaks back into the inside of the optic. All right, so I have the Aimpoint Acro inside the Tupperware. It's a very humid environment inside there. More humid than it was in August during monsoon season in Arizona. So I'll come back here in about a half hour and let's see what happens. All right, it's been a half hour. I'm going to open up my science experiment. We'll see what the optic looks like. Nothing obvious inside the lens. Let's make sure it can turn on. Dot is still visible. I'm going to wipe off the lens on my shirt. Looks like it doesn't have a leak now, so perhaps more glue on the brightness adjustment switch is all it needed. All right, so the Aimpoint Acro has come back from Sweden. I've done my moisture test on it. I got it back on my K19 Charlie, and I'm going to re-zero it. I'll see if the zero shifted in shipping back and forth. I'm assuming it did. And I'm going to start at 10 yards, and then I'll move it out to 20 and get my final zero. So the good thing about having it in the ransom rest is I can just move the dot to where it impacted on the target. 20-yard zeros are what I like to use with the red dot equipped pistols, particularly when it's mounted lower to the bore like the Acro is. So I've zeroed it in the ransom rest. Let's see how I do shooting it standing at the steel down range. Part of one of our other videos, we found out the MagTac 115 grain I was shooting wasn't that great. So I'm going to use the S&B jacketed hollow point, try to get a better group out of the Aimpoint Acro on my K19. So we've confirmed that the MagTac 115 grain ammo is essentially worthless for zeroing. Probably fine for just plinking and tearing up some trash in the desert, but the difference in zero and group size with the jacketed hollow point from S&B is quite stark. Like basically in the head, they're all touching. You know, I started off down here, getting it dialed in, got a little bit better, and then in the head, they're all right there. So really important to zero with quality ammunition, and I don't think you're going to really find out what's quality as far as group size until you put it on the bench or in a rest like that yourself. As is, I wouldn't hold this singular failure against the ACRO. Perhaps there was a simple problem with the sealing of this particular unit, and my testing after it was returned shows me that that probably won't be a problem again with this particular unit. Doing reviews like this takes a substantial amount of time and rounds fired, and it's one of the reasons why I'm reluctant to give an immediate opinion of something as soon as I get it out of the box. That's not the kind of review I like to do, and I think the only way to really know how well something works is to use it over an extended period of time under a wide variety of circumstances that you didn't choose. So if you like that kind of content and testing, keep coming back to InRangeTV, and we'll keep having it here for you. Thank you.